gave the lecture Good morning, distinguished delegates. I now declare open the 978th meeting of the Legal Subcommittee of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Distinguished colleagues, this morning we will continue our consideration of Agenda Item 3, General Exchange of Views. We will also begin our consideration of Agenda Item 5, Status and Application of the 5 United Nations Treaties on Outer Space, and Agenda Item 12, General Exchange of Views on the legal aspects of space traffic management. Before doing so, before commencing our consideration of the agenda items, I have the following to raise. With your permission, I propose that we begin our consideration of Agenda Item 15, proposals to the Committee for new items to be considered by the Subcommittee, on Friday afternoon this week, to begin discussions on the governance and method of work of the Committee and its subsidiary bodies. Delegations recall that this was considered at the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee session earlier this year, and that the Legal Subcommittee is also expected to discuss this matter. If I hear no objections, may I take it that it is agreed? It is so decided. We will schedule item 15 on Friday, 5 of April in the afternoon. I also wish to inform delegations that the delegation of Switzerland will hold informal consultations on the margins of this session on the long-term sustainability of outer space activities. An informal meeting will be held tomorrow, Wednesday, 3rd of April at 1:30 to 3 p.m. in room C5 on the 7th floor of this C building. A discussion paper by Switzerland was circulated to all delegations yesterday. Distinguished delegates, I would now like to continue our consideration of Agenda Item 3, General Exchange of Views. The first speaker on my list is the distinguished representative of South Africa. You have the floor.
Chairperson, the South African delegation wishes to express its sincerest appreciation for the work carried out by the Office for Outer Space Affairs under its director, Ms. Simonetta de People, in terms of preparing for and servicing this 58th session of the Legal Subcommittee of the UN COPUS. We would like to pledge our continued support to you as chairperson of this august gathering. We welcome the new members to UN COPUS: Cyprus, Ethiopia, Finland, Mauritius, and Paraguay. The South African delegation aligns itself with a statement delivered by the Group of 77 and China. Chairperson, the 5 UN treaties are the cornerstone of the international legal framework on outer space matters, and it is in this context that South Africa places great importance on the development of legal mechanisms to regulate the peaceful use, exploration, and utilization of outer space. The peaceful uses of outer space are a common and shared responsibility for all of us, and we need to preserve this for current and future generations. South Africa continues to emphasize that the only way to ensure the long-term sustainability of outer space activities is through the support of multilateralism, and therefore, by extension, the work of UN COPUS. In following a rules-based approach to the peaceful use of outer space, it is only by doing this that equal access can be maintained between all nations participating in outer space activities, irrespective of their development status. Last year, the Legal Subcommittee devoted a significant amount of time in deliberating the development of the UN General Assembly Resolution 73/6, titled 50th Anniversary of the First United Nations Conference on the Exploration and Peaceful Uses of Outer Space as a driver of sustainable development. This was indeed a significant resolution, and one that will provide a significant impetus to UN COPIUS, and indeed this subcommittee, in terms of driving the agenda and transformation of UN COPIUS. Last year, the successful Unispace Plus 50 celebrations highlighted that the environment of outer space is increasingly being influenced by scientific and technical developments, including so-called new space developments, deep space exploration, as well as in the relative near future, the exploitation and utilization of celestial bodies. There is also an increasing number of nations participating in outer space activities and wanting to be part of the governance thereof, as evidenced by the exponential growth of UN COPIUS membership over the last 10 years. Activities in outer space are increasingly being impacted upon by commercial operators, driven by ensuring financial returns on investment. Consequently, the space environment in which the 5 UN treaties were negotiated has changed. However, it is important to recognize that they remain the cornerstone of the rules-based framework for maintaining responsible actions in outer space. Consequently, new, emerging and developing spacefaring nations, as well as operators such as commercial companies and academic institutions, are increasingly looking to UN COPIUS and, importantly, this subcommittee for guidance. Chairperson, South Africa would like to call on all UN COPIUS members who have signed the existing space treaties to work within their legal prescripts and ultimately to domesticate them in national policies. South Africa is in the process of finalizing a review of our existing space legislation in order to include new and relevant provisions. The task is proving extensive, given the commitment by government to ensure that the new draft legislation that will act as an enabler to our existing space industry. We are proud to state that this updated legislation expressly incorporates the legal principles and elements established by the space treaties that South Africa is a party to, as well as certain declarations and other extensive guidelines of this committee. In addition, the South African Council for Space Affairs is actively pursuing its mandate as the regulatory body for space affairs in South Africa under the leadership of the Minister of Trade and Industry. Chairperson, international cooperation is the cornerstone of South Africa's space program. In this regard, South Africa reiterates the importance of the African Space Policy and Strategy, which was adopted in January 2016. The development of this policy and strategy is one of the flagship programs of the Africa Union Agenda 2063 and is raising awareness to the central role of space science and technology in Africa's socio-economic development. In addition, South Africa also welcomes the decision of the 32nd Ordinary Session of the Assembly of the African Union, held in February 2019, to establish an African Space Agency to be hosted in Egypt. South Africa looks forward to working with our continental partners, both multilaterally and bilaterally, towards the development of this agency. Chairperson, the Legal Subcommittee has a number of important items on its agenda that are relevant to South Africa as an emerging space nation. These include matters relating to the definition and delimitation of outer space, the consideration of ways and means to ensure the rational and equitable use of the geostationary orbit, the application of international law to small satellite activities, and potential legal models for activities in exploration, exploitation, and utilization of space resources. South Africa looks forward to actively participating in these deliberations. Chairperson, in terms of capacity building and international outreach, South Africa was again honoured to have organised the 2018 Africa round of the Manfred Lachs Space Law Moot Court competition. The Africa round took place from 28 to 29 June 2018 and was hosted by the South African Council for Space Affairs and the Department of Trade and Industry, with the support of the South African National Space Agency. South Africa places great importance on this event as it offers a platform and exposure for students, academics, legal professionals and the space community from across Africa to gain exposure on matters of international space law. In 2018, 4 universities participated from across the African continent. Chairperson, I am honoured to report that the University of Pretoria went on to represent Africa at the World Finals held on the sidelines of the 69th International Astronautics Conference that took place in Bremen, Germany, during October 2018, thereby affirming the level of expertise in respect to space law in South Africa. I am also pleased to report that South Africa will again host the African Regional Finals later this year in Pretoria. Chairperson, in closing, allow me to iterate that the activities of states in the extreme environment of outer space, if not governed according to multilateral processes and the rule of law, could lead to a situation of increased tension in outer space relations. Consequently, we should be guided by the existing international space treaties and the fact that outer space is a global commons for equitable exploitation and indeed protection by all nations for today, as well as for the benefit of future generations. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of South Africa for his statement. And the next speaker on my list is the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to begin by expressing my gratitude to the Director of the Office for Outer Space Affairs, Ms. Simonetta Di Pippo, and Mr. Hedman, Secretary of the Subcommittee, and all staff of the Secretariat for organizing what my delegation hopes will be a fruitful session. As we proceed, Chairman, you can be sure of my delegation's full support for a successful outcome. Mr. Chairman, owing to rapid advances in space technology and expansion of the outer space activities by a broader community of actors, the role of the legal subcommittee is as important now as ever in the committee's 60-year history. My delegation looks forward to a constructive debate over the coming week in order to strengthen relevant norms of international space law and foster international cooperation for the exploration and use of outer space for peaceful purpose. Taking this opportunity, my delegation once again expresses our full support for the UN Unispace Plus 50 Resolution A/RES/73/91, which highlights the exploration and peaceful uses of outer space as a driver of sustainable development. In this regard, we hope that during the session of LSC, the Working Group on Space 2030 makes further progress. I also thank the chairs of the Working Group on the status and application of the 5 United Nations treaties on outer space and the definition and delimitation of outer space for their hard work and looks forward to making additional progress at this session. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce the Republic of Korea's national space activities. In accordance with the basic plan for the promotion of space development, Korea has conducted various space activities, including the development of satellite and launch vehicle. Starting with the first Korean multi-purpose satellite in 1999, it has focused on developing high-resolution remote sensing satellites. The recently launched COMSAT-2A, which is in trial orbit, is expected to contribute to disaster response with its ability to detect even a regional downpour at least 2 hours in advance. The launch of COMSAT 2B early next year is also under preparation, which aims at monitoring microdust and air pollutants in East Asia as an environmental observation satellite. Furthermore, the Republic of Korea aims to build a space rocket capable of putting a satellite into its designated orbit at any time. In November last year, it successfully launched a test rocket, achieving the second step of a 3-phase plan to achieve this goal, and anticipates having the capacity to launch a 1.5-ton satellite into low Earth orbit from its own spaceport by 2025. Mr. Chairman, the Republic of Korea affirms the necessity of establishing international norms, rules, and principles for the peaceful use of outer space and sustainable development. Accordingly, the Korean government has contributed to the long-term sustainability guidelines by taking part in the LTS working group and the UN Group of Government Experts report on transparency and confidence-building measures in outer space activities. It also continued to increase its capability to monitor space objects, including debris in orbit, and align its national space policy and legal frameworks with international norms for space environmental preservation. As part of this effort, 3 approaches are being taken, which are establishing domestic guidelines for diminishing space debris, raising public awareness, and encouraging the relevant actors to voluntarily implement established policies for their space activities. Moreover, Korea has promoted international cooperation in the field of space situational awareness. Since the Master Plan for SSA was established in 2014, the Korean Astronomy and Space Science Institute has played a key role in the management of national space hazard at risk situations. In January of this year, the Korean government and Korea Aerospace Research Institute held the SSA International Workshop with the Secure World Foundation. This provided a great opportunity to share issues and hear from overseas experts, relevant authorities, and organizations regarding the promotion of global cooperation on space situational monitoring. Mr. Chairman, lastly, international space law provides a sound basis for promoting the safety, security, and sustainability of outer space activities, guaranteeing that the benefits of peaceful space activities will be available to current and future generations. As a party to the 4 space treaties, the Republic of Korea will continue to actively promote acceptance and implementation of international space agreements for the benefit of all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Netherlands.
Mr. Chair, distinguished delegations. Mr. Chair, thank you for giving me the floor, and let me first take this opportunity to express my government's appreciation for your guidance of this committee. We look forward to a constructive session. I would also like to congratulate Ms. Simonetto Di Pipo, Mr. Nicholas Hedman, and the Secretariat on their excellent work in preparation of this session. And I would like to welcome Cyprus, Ethiopia, Finland, Mauritius, and Paraguay as new members to this committee. The Kingdom of the Netherlands aligns itself with the statement of the European Union, but would like to state the following in its national capacity. My government would like to stress the importance of the work of this committee with respect to the promotion and development of the legal regime applicable to outer space. Between the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee and the main committee, the Legal Subcommittee has the important task of monitoring, discussing, and promoting the legal standards applicable to activities in and related to outer space. My government would like to take this opportunity to mark the issues that are of particular importance and concern to the Kingdom of the Netherlands. These are the issues of space debris mitigation and remediation measures, space traffic management, and the potential legal models for the exploration, exploitation, and use of outer space resources. In the context of the latter, my government will provide an update of the activities of the Hague International Space Resources Governance Working Group. The Netherlands will provide statements in due course to share its views on these topics under the relevant agenda items. For now, Mr. Chair, distinguished delegations, I look forward to a successful and efficient meeting of this committee. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Netherlands for her statement, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Chile.
Gracias.
Thank you, sir. We're very pleased to see you head this subcommittee on legal matters, and we thank the director and the staff of UN-USA for the excellent preparatory work leading up to this session. My delegation joins in the statements made on behalf of G77 and China, and the statement made on behalf of Latin American and Caribbean group of countries, but we would like to add these elements in our personal capacity. We are firmly convinced that the use, utilization, and exploration of outer space should come about exclusively for peaceful purposes and for the benefit and interest of the international community as a whole, irrespective of the level of economic and scientific development of the members and in keeping with international law. We appeal to all countries, especially those with major space capacities to development, those in strict compliance with the principles that regulate the activities of states in the exploration and utilization of outer space. We believe that the exploration and utilization of outer space must come about in such a manner as to ensure sustainability of public and private space activities so that future generations may continue the work we have embarked on by particularly adopting measures that ensure the safe operation of all uses of outer space. We think international community must cooperate to make sure that we have efficient exploration and utilization of outer space that benefits humankind. We think that it is in our interest, in compliance with the international treaties, to make sure that we have means available to have space activities then go on to space elimination of risk and mitigation of risk or impact thereof for space navigation. There should be universal and equitable access to outer space for all countries without discrimination or any difference in terms of their scientific, technical, or economic level of development. The equitable and rational use of outer space to benefit humankind as a whole, non-appropriation of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, by claim to sovereignty over these, its utilization, occupation, or use by any other means, use of outer space as a common heritage of humankind and for the benefit of humankind. Non-militarization of outer space, sustainability of operations in outer space, international cooperation in the area of space objects, navigation, that must be safe furthermore, and international cooperation for mitigation of space debris, tracing mitigation efforts, as well as navigation in outer space. In particular, recognition of the significance of international cooperation to develop space law, specifically provisions and relevant rules applying to the use of outer space, and also measures to bolster international cooperation, particularly in the area of space technology for peaceful purposes and the application thereof. A good example of the aforementioned is constant support of satellite imagery for disaster management and emergency response, and all the events that have affected Chile over the past years. Connectivity is furthermore an issue for remote areas, and remote sensing systems generate space-based information for space planning, management of natural resources, and how this has an impact on the development of the country as a whole. Mr. Chairperson, we point to the significance of transparency and confidence-building measures, particularly in outer space. These are voluntary in nature, but they reinforce the overall purpose of preventing an arms race in outer space, and they ensure security and sustainability of such activities. We call on all states, in particular those with a high level of space capacity and development, to make a contribution to this peaceful use of outer space and refrain from positioning or operating any military device whatsoever. We point to the efforts and impact of the Working Group on Long-Term Sustainability of Outer Space Activities, and in particular the 21 guidelines that were adopted. Implementation of these, although they're voluntary in nature, will make a contribution to more sustainable and safer space activities, and will ensure that all countries may have equitable access to natural resources in space. We believe that in the near future it will be important to continue the activities of this group. We would already say that we stand ready to make a contribution to the formulation of measures to incorporate the concepts of sustainability in space operations, and we encourage all to give more in-depth consideration to international cooperation in terms of security of navigation of space objects and their useful life. We continue to consider that the international legal framework must be taken a step further in order to prevent rules and standards that would hamper activities of developing countries or constrain their access to space technology. We support more effort to go to the bolstering of legal capacity of these countries via international cooperation. It is indeed relevant for the international community to make efforts to guide cooperation in terms of safe navigation of space vehicles and objects, and we are much in favor of all activities that sustain operations in outer space in order to maintain access and viability of all space players. One of the most urgent aspects is the efforts to take the Space Agenda 2030 a step further because of the contributions of these activities to the UN SDG goals for 2030. We need to renew and strengthen international space cooperation so that the benefits of space technology and their applications may be reaped by all. We are well aware of UNOSA's efforts in terms of capacity building in space to promote the understanding, acceptance, and implementation of the UN treaties and principles relating to activities in outer space. We believe that in the future, this program should continue to focus on areas that are as yet insufficiently developed and discussed: the definition and delimitation of outer space, or issues relating to the character and utilization of the geostationary orbit, including the consideration of means for its rational use, without prejudice to the role of the International Telecommunications Union. We think there's a need to make headway in terms of international cooperation for sustainability of space operations and the control and safe maintenance of space objects and vehicles in outer space in order to permit a coexistence of the present and future users of the space environment, which we all share. These are topics that have ever greater relevance, which is why it's necessary to enhance legal know-how and meet the new challenges that relate to air, orbit, and suborbit space use. To conclude, I renew our expressions of readiness to make a constructive contribution to the debates of this subcommittee. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative of Chile for his statement, and the next speaker on my list is the distinguished representative of Finland.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. First, I would like to thank you for chairing this session and Director Di Pippo and the United Nations Office for Outer Space for the excellent organization of this meeting. Mr. Chair and distinguished delegates and representatives, Finland participates for the first time as a member state of the UN COPUOS in this 58th meeting of the Legal Subcommittee. We thank the member states of the committee for their support in the membership application process. We recognize the importance of the committee, including its subcommittees, as the main forum for an international dialogue on space law, space policy issues, and wish to actively contribute in the workings of this committee. Finland believes that the 5 UN treaties on outer space are the cornerstones of international space law, together with the UN General Assembly sets of principles as well as other related documents and resolutions adopted by the UN General Assembly. Finland believes that having binding guidance at international level for the conduct of space activities brings predictability and creates conditions for tackling global problems. In parallel, Finland stresses the importance of effective implementation of non-legally binding instruments, in particular with regards to orbital space debris mitigation at national level, as we believe that those instruments are currently the best way to forward for an international regime for sustainable use and safe conduct of outer space activities. Mr. Chair, Finland fully aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union. In the autumn of 2019, Finland will hold the presidency of the Council of the European Union and will continue the ambitious work of the preceding presidencies to further the continuation and development of the EU space programme, including the global satellite navigation system Galileo and the Earth observation system Copernicus. Finland is a member of the European Space Agency since 1995, and the Finnish industry and research organizations continue to actively participate in various ESA programs, as well as in opportunities offered by the European Organization for the Exploitation of Meteorological Satellites and the European Southern Observatory. In this framework, also bilateral collaborations continue to have an important role in the Finnish space program. Finland notes with appreciation the outstanding work of the committee, its subcommittees, and the Office for Outer Space Affairs in developing the 7 thematic priorities and the objectives related to Unispace Plus 50, which provide great basis for the preparation of the Space 2030 agenda. Finland supports and will continue in the continuous development of these objectives and stresses the importance of strong cooperation amongst all the actors, the member states, intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations, and the private sector entities in fulfilling the goals of sustainable development. The activities that are of particular interest to Finland include the sustainable use of outer space and the development of the UN space treaties and other legal norms, taking into consideration technological development and the rise of new space actors, including the challenges relating to orbital space debris mitigation and remediation. On that note, Finland is currently looking into the most meaningful and effective ways of nationally implementing the 21 guidelines for long-term sustainability of outer space activities, and will continue to provide the committee with information on the process and the results. Mr. Chair, we would like to highlight to this subcommittee some activities that took place in Finland in 2018 to promote international collaboration in the field of space. For more detailed information, we refer to document A/AC105/1189 Add 1, including the responses of Finland to the call by the Secretariat to the Member States to submit annual reports on their space activities. The first comprehensive national space law, the Act on Space Activities and Supplementing Decree by the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment, entered into force in January 2018. The Act and the Decree establish an authorization and supervision process for national space activities, as well as a national space object registry. The objective of the national legislation, in addition to ensuring compliance with states' international obligations, is to create a predictable and legally transparent environment for national space activities and to ensure the safety of the activities as well as the sustainable use of outer space. The latter aspect is being highlighted by the inclusion of requirements for mitigation of space debris and minimizing adverse impacts of space missions to the Earth, atmosphere, and the outer space in the law. The National Space Strategy of Finland was revised in 2018, setting a goal for creating and maintaining an attractive and agile environment for space business activities and fostering world-class research activities. In support, funding networks and export services for Finnish companies for developing international space-related business is made through, for example, a new space economy program run by Business Finland. Moreover, as a result of the revision of the space strategy, developing the National Space Administration was also started to ensure good coordination within both the national actors and the international community to ensure on its part that the objectives set can be reached. This work is currently ongoing. The Finnish space activities have emerged and increased in rapid pace. There are currently 5 satellites registered in the Finnish Registry of Space Objects, and all of these have been launched in the past 2 years. These satellites include both missions by scientific institutions as well as commercial companies. Finland considers that international cooperation, coordination, and information sharing with regards to all aspects of small satellite activities and related services is key to enable reaching the goals of both sustainable and safe use of outer space. Finally, Chair, I would like to mention that as Finland's chairmanship in the Arctic Council draws at its end this year, Finland continues to emphasize the implementation of the Paris Agreement under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Sustainable Development Goals in Arctic cooperation. The priorities such as environmental protection, connectivity, meteorological collaboration and education are very relevant in the Arctic, but also in space cooperation. Thank you, Chair, and distinguished delegates and representatives.
I thank the distinguished representative of Finland for her first statement in this legal subcommittee. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are very pleased to work under your chairmanship. We are grateful to the Secretariat for the wonderful preparatory work they have conducted for this session. We greet the esteemed representatives of Cyprus, Mauritius, Finland, and Paraguay as our new colleagues and participants of our discussions. Distinguished delegates, the events of recent years, including the discussions that took place at the last session of the UN Space Committee and its subcommittees, as well in the framework of the Moscow Conference on Outer Space Law and Policy. About the outcomes of this event, we will present to the members of our subcommittee in more detail later on. Clearly indicate the following tendencies. Firstly, with the growth of the intensity and the number of actors who have actively been involved in the activity on the exploration and the use of outer space, we have seen now a situation that has emerged over an oversaturation of this field of activities, which is of direct threat to the principle of the openness of outer space for research and use for the common good and in the interest of all states without any discrimination whatsoever. In other words, for the long-term sustainability of outer space activity. In essence, we are talking about forming of a kind of conflict zone, which in and of itself is in direct contradiction to the principle which states that the activity of states in use and exploration of outer space must be conducted in line with international law, including the UN Charter, in the interest of enhancing international peace and security. Based on this, there is an imperative, urgent need and an obligation of all states to make sure that they broadly and in good faith should cooperate in preventing the growth of any kind of conflict, potential for conflict, and settling any kind of emerging issues based on, and I would like to stress this, a comprehensive and balanced approach. Yesterday's discussion, we see, has confirmed the fact that under the committee here on outer space, there is a consensus with regard to the fact that there is a common interest in maintaining the outer space as a safe area without any conflicts, but should be open for broad cooperation based on equality and for the good of all mankind. This presumes that we should have a systemic decision at the global level of the entire range of issues with regard to the management of space activities. This includes its other aspects that are all interlinked amongst each other, such as the prevention, the mitigation and remediation of space debris, the management of space traffic, the elaboration of balanced resolutions to issues which are linked to the use of small satellites. In this connection, in expressing our satisfaction with the scientific subcommittee's approval of the text of the 21 principles of the sustainable development of outer space activities, we would like to underscore that there is a real insufficiency and the fragmented character of this measure. At the same time, I would also like to note, Mr. Chairman, that our colleagues in the committee and in the subcommittee should be very careful when they talk about the 21 adopted principles. In reality, we talked about 28 principles. And we need to be correct when we talk about how the committee and the subcommittees consider these principles. This stresses the fact that the work and the topic for this committee as a top priority, and the Russian delegation would like to stress, this topic has not been closed. We insist that colleagues working in the subcommittee, with their full responsibility, should handle this issue, to continue a substantive consideration and discussion of those aspects that have been reflected in the proposals proposed by the Russian Federation, but which, to our deep regret, didn't come into the outcome of the document in the format of the scientific committee. We are grateful to colleagues from Switzerland for their proposal to conduct additional consultations on this issue and the very useful discussion document that they have prepared. We welcome the creation of the committee's working group on outer space under the item of our Agenda 2030, and its work on the thematic additions to the future framework document, which will lay the foundation for the elaboration of international cooperation in the area of the exploration and the utilization of outer space for peaceful uses. Firstly and foremost, in the framework of the UNOSA and its subcommittees. We also, in this context, would like to confirm the view that there is a lack of a reasonable and international law principles, and which also correspond to the UN Charter, about the alternative of the idea to create, under the aegis of the United Nations, of a global, using single international standards, unified international standards, of a platform to gather, to process, and to the dissemination of information regarding the objects and events taking place in outer space. we do not see any other reasonable alternative, Mr. Chairman, to this plan. This idea has been prepared in detail in the disseminated document distributed by the Russian Federation. We believe that this does not correspond to the principles of international law, and which we do not accept this plan of creating of such a platform based on the relevant infrastructure, which is under the jurisdiction and the control of any specific state or group of states. Second point. As a result of the developments in science and technology, humanity has now come up to a kind of border which means that we are stepping into an area and a phase of our lives. We are really exploring and getting ready to develop outer space resources, which goes hand in hand with the risk of the exacerbation of and the stepping up of the global battle to develop new resources. This also includes outer space, which means that the acute interstate conflicts and problems may be extended to outer space. The most useful means of preventing this type of scenario of taking place, which would undermine international peace and security, as we see it, is the launching under the UN Committee on Outer Space, and only in this specific committee, because this is the core, central, and universal and a unique body to do this. Many delegations have mentioned this, for a substantive, results-focused solutions, and which is of utmost importance also, based on the principles and standards and norms of a 1967 Outer Space Agreement, which also codifies all of these principles. It includes the discussion of issues of the creation of an international mechanism of managing outer space resources. At the same time, we would like to stress, we are talking here not about some kind of model acts or framework acts or a set of recommendations. We are talking about the elaboration of a legally binding international treaty or a system of agreements which, on the one hand, would create a reliable legal foundation for the national legal regulation or laws for the planning, preparation, and a non-conflict-based implementation of outer space resource exploration and utilization. And, on the other hand, which would fully correspond to the generally accepted principles and standards which are set out in the Treaty on Outer Space. This would include the established prohibitions on national appropriation of outer space resources. Based on this principle, the principles which pertain to territorial sovereignty may not be applied in relation to outer space, and which, linked to the other principles under the agreement, would safeguard outer space from conflicts linked to territorial claims or colonial ambitions. Mr. Chairman, here I have quoted from the fragment of the text which is in the Kanska comments on international space law. We are not against the creation by certain states and even by business circles of the necessary infrastructure for the future activity on the exploration and use of space resources. However, only to the extent that if these efforts do not overstep the red lines which have been established through international law, and specifically, which would not be aimed at creating, in any form whatsoever, of national control or jurisdiction with regard to outer space resources. In any case, the relevant national legislation must correspond to international law. We believe that the evolution of the situation, in light of what I've just said, must remain in the constant focus and attention of the Legal Subcommittee, the UN Outer Space Committee, as well as the United Nations General Assembly. With regard to the idea of the supposedly non-applicability of Article 2 of the Outer Space Agreement in the work of non-state actors and the so-called extracted resources, with regard to the harm and the inapplicability of this concept, is something we would like to talk about in more detail when we come to item 14 of our session's agenda. At this point in time, we would like to express our solidarity with a professional and responsible approach, which has been reflected in the document, which has been prepared by our colleagues from Belgium and Greece, and also with the statement made yesterday by the esteemed delegate of Germany. We would like to, however, suggest that we should also think about somewhat to modify the idea of the special working group, which we see as having the status of a working group of the UN Committee on Outer Space. However, its work should be supported by two subgroups. One, which would act under the mandate of the Legal Subcommittee, while the other in line with the mandate of the Scientific Subcommittee. This would fully correspond to the idea that we agree with in strengthening the operational coordination activities between these two subcommittees, starting a legal discussion of the very complicated issues of the exploration of state resources, not using the professional knowledge in the scientific sphere means we are just going to be having empty academic discussions, and the time for that is long gone. We also wouldn't be against the participation in these future discussions in any form that would be acceptable to members of the committee, of interested parties from the business community. Thirdly, we have clearly seen that there is a true need to strengthen and develop interagency cooperation between the UN Committee on Outer Space, its subcommittees, and the UN Office on Outer Space on a range of specialized topics that they deal with other competent international organizations. Here we can mention the work with the geostationary orbit linked activities with the the work with the International Union of ITU, with the ITU, in the context of the work on determining the regime of managing outer space resources. Also of principal importance, as the Russian delegations sees it, is the prevention of using the specific programs and objects which are of dual use, with the aim of which would not be applicable with the imperative need to safeguard outer space. This would include the moon and other celestial bodies, in order for them to be used for exclusively peaceful purposes. In this connection, Mr. Chairman, one of the most significant foundations in formation and the practical implementation for transparency and for confidence building will be the establishment of cooperation with specialized international bodies. First and foremost, the mechanism of the United Nations Conference on Disarmament. We also agree with colleagues, specifically the delegates of Indonesia and Pakistan, to step up and swiftly finalizing the work of the delimitation of the spheres of the use of international outer space and airspace law. The multi-year discussions on this topic have been extremely interesting. We are grateful to our Brazilian colleagues that they have headed this discussion. But we believe that this discussion we should try to stray away from an overall kind of doctrinal discussion to a more focused one. And perhaps we can think about preparing some kind of working document for the subcommittee on this issue. In conclusion, I assure you, Mr. Chairman, that my delegation is prepared to work as constructively as possibly to work with you and other colleagues in discussing all of the items on the agenda for this session. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The United States delegation is confident that under your leadership we will have a highly successful session, and we look forward to working with you. We commend the Director of the Office of Outer Space Affairs, the Secretariat, and the entire office for their work preparing for this session, and we welcome the newest member states to the committee: Cyprus, Ethiopia, Finland, Mauritius, and Paraguay. Mr. Chair, it has now been more than a half-century since the Outer Space Treaty entered into force. Much has changed in the past half-century, but the importance of the Outer Space Treaty, along with the 3 other core space agreements, has not diminished. The work of COPUOS and this legal subcommittee is therefore more important than ever. We have a lot to talk about in these 2 weeks, so instead of taking a very long time and summarizing our positions on each issue, I want to use this opportunity to update this subcommittee on space-related activities in the United States. 2018 was an eventful year for the United States space program. NASA celebrated its 60th anniversary with yet another spacecraft landing on the surface of Mars. They entered into new commercial partnerships for deliveries to the lunar surface. There were technology breakthroughs and significant progress with our mission to once again send humans to the moon. As directed by Space Policy Directive 1, NASA is returning to the moon. Just last week, during the 5th meeting of our National Space Council, Vice President Pence accelerated these plans by announcing that our president has charged NASA to land humans on the surface of the moon by 2024. This time we will not go alone, but in a way that reflects the world today. With government, industry, and international partners in a global effort to build and test the systems needed for challenging missions to Mars and other destinations. NASA is working with commercial and international partners to address the great challenges of living and working in space farther from Earth, in the process creating new knowledge that benefits all of humanity and inspires the world. Working with its partners, NASA is leading development of the first human outpost in orbit around the Moon, known as the Gateway. This gateway to the Moon and beyond will give us a sustainable presence in lunar space. It will fuel scientific discovery, propel activities with commercial and international partners to explore the Moon and its resources, and translate that experience toward human missions to Mars. The International Space Station is a cornerstone of our integrated approach to deep space. The United States is dedicated to using the full potential of this station to demonstrate critical technologies, learn about human health in space, and focus commercial energies on the growing low Earth orbit economy. Last year, we celebrated the 20th anniversary of the launch of the first element of the ISS. More than 230 people from 18 countries have visited the ISS, and the ISS has hosted more than 2,500 scientific investigations from more than 100 countries. All of this would not have been possible without the contributions from 15 nations, represented by the Canadian Space Agency, the European Space Agency, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, and Roscosmos, in partnership with NASA. These past achievements and future goals are also legal successes. Much-deserved praise goes to the engineers and scientists who make these missions reality, but those of us in the legal subcommittee should not forget that international law is involved as well. It was a series of international agreements that put the International in the International Space Station. Various bilateral and multilateral agreements, memoranda, and other documents provide the framework for almost every instance of international space cooperation that we can describe. These documents together give life to the spirit of cooperation that permeates the Outer Space Treaty, and they deserve celebration in their own right. Mr. Chair, since the dawn of the space age, the United States has used satellites to better understand our home planet, improve lives, and safeguard our future. The United States makes its Earth observations freely and openly available to those seeking solutions to important global issues, such as freshwater availability, food security, and human health. The U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration satellite systems provide forecasters around the world with timely access to highly accurate and detailed observations critical for improved weather prediction computer models. The U.S. Geological Survey continues to operate Landsat 7 and Landsat 8 satellites, collecting on average approximately 1,200 global scenes per day. Landsat 8 provides imaging to support campaigns for 50 volcanoes globally. The U.S. Geological Survey and NASA are working together to launch Landsat 9 in 2020. All of the approximately 8 million unique Landsat scenes are freely available to users worldwide and continue to provide essential information for science and geospatial applications, with nearly 70% of these archive scenes directly attributable to our international partnerships. This incredible wealth of information, shared with the world freely by the United States, demonstrates beyond any doubt that our exploration and use of outer space are, in the words of the Outer Space Treaty, for the benefit and in the interest of all countries. Mr. Chair, the United States private sector has been very busy in space in the past year as well. These achievements are sometimes high profile, sometimes less so, but taken together they amount to a flourishing ecosystem of companies that meet a range of needs in space and here on Earth. U.S. companies are close to taking paying passengers into space on suborbital flights, as well as transporting astronauts to the ISS and beyond. Likewise, small satellite manufacturers, remote sensing companies, and communications companies are pushing the boundaries of what can be done faster, more efficiently, and more effectively than ever before. We are proud of the space sector in the United States, and we see international law, including international space law, as a key tool to enable these actors to flourish in a predictable environment. In that regard, we recognize the continued importance of meeting our obligations to authorize and supervise the activities of U.S. actors in outer space. One way we do that is by maintaining and updating our domestic regulations regarding space activities. In May of last year, the President issued Space Policy Directive 2, which directed agencies across the United States government to examine and revise those domestic regulations, all while maintaining our adherence to our international obligations. We are proud to say that these efforts are bearing fruit, and we are in the midst of revising regulations relating to remote sensing, spectrum usage, launch and re-entry, small satellites, and orbital debris to keep up with advancing technology and to meet the needs of the space sector. As the United States goes about encouraging private investment from all nations in the peaceful exploration and use of outer space, and evolves our national mechanisms for authorizing and continuing supervision of non-governmental space activities, we will continue to be guided by the 4 core and widely accepted treaties on space: the Outer Space Treaty, the Rescue and Return Agreement, and the Liability and Registration Conventions. Under the legal framework of these treaties, the use of space by nations, international organizations, and private entities has flourished. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States for her statement. Dear colleagues, may I encourage delegations to consider taking the floor during this morning session, since we haven't received many requests for the floor, with 2 observers on this agenda item and 3 delegations who will speak on 2 remaining points during this morning session. That would be all. So may I encourage you once again to think about it. In the meantime, I'm giving the floor to the representative of the International Institute of Space Law. Okay. Okay, I give the floor then to the representative of the European Space Agency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Distinguished delegates, let me first commend you, Mr. Chairman, on your excellent work leading this subcommittee. You already demonstrated last year. I also commend Simonetta Di Pippo and her staff for the professional preparation, support and guidance. As a permanent observer, the European Space Agency remains committed to make a positive contribution to this session of the subcommittee. The elapsed year was a particularly busy one for ESA. We are proud to have witnessed a successful launch of several important missions. Let me highlight in all brevity the following: the launch of Sentinel-3B, the second ocean mission of the Copernicus program; the Galileo final constellation mission, complementing Europe navigation system. Both these missions we have conducted on behalf of the European Union. For ESA Aeolus, our 5th Earth Explorer mission, the world's first satellite mission to acquire profiles of wind on a global scale. Bepi Colombo, our newest planetary exploration mission, now en route to planet Mercury. Bepi Colombo is also an important cooperation milestone with our partner Japan, and I would like here to take the opportunity to commend the Japanese delegation for this shared success. Furthermore, the launch of METOP-C is a third large meteorological observation in low Earth orbit. And not to forget the successful Horizons missions of the ESA astronaut Alexander Guest to International Space Station, leading him to assume command of the station as the second European commander. These missions, managed and carried out by ESA on behalf of its member states, show that inspiration and cooperation enable scientific discovery and open up benefits for citizens around the globe. However, such list is no reason to rest. Indeed, the year 2019 is a very busy one for ESA, too. End of this year, the ministers for space of our 22 member states will meet to define new strategic programs and their funding for the years to come. This council meeting at ministerial level, to be convened under the motto of Space 19+, shall pave the way for new developments and discoveries. One area of particular importance will be the safety and sustainability of space activities, including the proposal to carry out the world's first active debris removal mission. Indeed, we are working with European industry to assess options for removing a non-functional ESA space object from orbit for the benefit of the wider space community. We equally will propose new activities and missions across the entire range of ESA's programs. As new programs keep us busy, we are also working with our member states and partners to make the European space landscape fit for the future. We shall guarantee the best return of investment for our citizens at large. ESA's convention, an international treaty, continues to provide the successful legal framework for enabling space cooperation in Europe and beyond. ESA is both a mechanism and an actor in the global space cooperation. Many of our partners are here represented in this forum here today, and I thank them for their trust and support to ESA. As an international government organization, and not least as a permanent observer to COPWAS, ESA is aware of the power of cooperation and equally of the importance of the rule of law in outer space. Since the 1960s, international space law and consensus making under the auspices of the United Nations have contributed to enabling the exploration and use of outer space in a peaceful manner. In this context, let me highlight two recent events. ESA and the Office for Outer Space Affairs have concluded two memoranda of understanding, the first of their kind, one that shall enable the free use of ESA large-diameter centrifuge for selected teams of UN member states, with particular emphasis on developing countries. The second shall support the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals through cooperation between ESA and the Office. ESA is also contributing to the continued development and application of space law. We advise our member states which develop or update their national space legislation. We are glad to have helped several member states in the past, and we're currently working together with some others. Like this, we share the concern for an adequate regulatory environment to authorize, supervise, and foster space activity at national level. We also bring communities together and foster interdisciplinary exchange. Just 2 weeks ago, some 150 legal and technical experts met for the first ESA workshop on space debris regulation and tools in ESA Operations Center, Darmstadt, Germany. In June, we will offer the second Introduction to Space Law course for young scientists and engineers. And in October, we will invite governmental experts to the newest edition of our executive course on space law and regulation. All this is enabled by the work of the ESA-funded European Centre for Space Law. We celebrated yesterday its 30th anniversary. Let me conclude, Mr. Chairman, by emphasizing ESA's commitment to remain active, dutiful member of the international space community, exploring and using outer space, working towards capacity and partnership building, strengthening the rule of law in outer space, and last but not least, contributing as a permanent observer in a meaningful way to the important work of this committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the representative of the European Space Agency, and now I give the floor to the International Institute of Space Law, please.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the IISL has, as usual, submitted a written report covering our activities since last year's legal subcommittee and up to the present. Now, I will provide some highlights and would like to refer you to the written text for more details. The IISL was founded in 1960 as an independent, non-governmental organization dedicated to fostering the development of space law in partnership with various international and national institutions. It celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2010, meaning that next year we will celebrate our 60th. The membership of the IISL is composed of individuals and institutions from almost 50 countries, whom have been elected on the basis of their contributions to the field of space law or other social sciences related to space activities. The IISL holds its annual colloquium on current issues in space law at the International Astronautical Congress. During the annual colloquia, the IISL strives to address topics that are of real interest to all space actors. Another major activity is the annual Manfred Lachs Space Law Moot Court Competition, organized since 1992, and a third is the annual Galloway Symposium on Critical Issues in Space Law. The IISL continues to implement its commitment to expanded global outreach and has introduced events in Russia and an upcoming symposium in China. The IISL presented several awards to distinguished members of the space law community in 2018. I'm especially pleased to report that the IISL conferred the Lifetime Achievement Award to Dr. George S. Robinson, the Distinguished Service Award to Mr. Jason Steptoe, and the Certificate of Gratitude to the China Institute of Space Law. Finally, our yearly writing competition for a young scholar, the Deirdre's Verschure Award, was awarded to Mr. Andrea Capurso from Italy for his paper titled The Non-Appropriation Principle, a Roman Interpretation, which was presented in Bremen at the IAC. These are a few highlights of our activities since last year's subcommittee and to date in 2019. During yesterday's afternoon session of the Legal Subcommittee, the Institute, along with the European Center for Space Law, organized a highly informative symposium on the topic The Moon Agreement Revisited, The Road Ahead. The 61st IISL Colloquium was held from the 1st to the 5th of October 2018 in Bremen, Germany, in conjunction with the 67th IAC. The IISL hosted 5 legal sessions, as well as 2 joint sessions with the IAA and the IAF, respectively. The colloquia topics included financing space, procurement, competition, and regulatory approach, space law at Unispace plus 50, consequences and future perspectives, the relationship between space law and cyber law, the 33rd IAA-IISL Scientific Legal Roundtable discussed global cooperation and planetary defense, and the joint IAF-IISL session on collaborative space activities focusing upon micro-launching and very large constellations of microsatellites. The 13th Eileen Galloway Symposium on Critical Issues in Space Law was held at the Cosmos Club in Washington, D.C. on the 5th of December 2018, once more to standing room only with over 100 attendees. The symposium featured keynote speakers and provocative panels, including international academics and practitioners, highlighting the challenges of the development of both domestic and international space law and the interaction of space law with physics, regulation, commercial development, robotic and human exploration, and political philosophy. Topics to be addressed at the 67th IISL Colloquium, to be held in conjunction with the 68th IAC in Washington, D.C., include dispute settlement, national space legislation, space traffic management, space mining, and the remediation of space debris. The Nandasiri Jacintuliana keynote lecture on Tuesday, the 22nd of October, will be given by our Vice President, Professor Dr. Setsuko Aoki. The World Finals of the 28th Manfred Lachs Space Law Moot Court Competition will be held during this 2019 colloquium. 3 judges of the International Court of Justice have been invited to judge the finals. Regional rounds are now going on in Europe, North America, Africa, and the Asia Pacific. The IISL has formed a working group to study cyber law and is now standing a working group to study the interrelationships between space law and international law, to be chaired by distinguished IISL member Nicholas Hedman. 11 International Publishing publishes the annual IISL proceedings and has now placed all IISL proceedings online in a fully searchable online portal. More information is available in our written report. The IISL notes the important legal subcommittee agenda item for the general exchange of views on the legal aspects of space traffic management. The IISL concluded a second agreement with the International Academy of Astronautics and the International Astronautical Federation in October 2018, following on to the one executed the year before. This second agreement commits the 3 organizations to collaborate on the important issues surrounding space traffic management. The 3 organizations have nominated representatives, and work has commenced with the intention of presenting ideas to the combined memberships in the near future. The IISL is honored to cooperate with COPUOS and its subsidiary bodies in the further development of space law. In particular, the IISL is prepared to assist, as appropriate, in carrying out background studies needed for the consideration and information of COPUOS. Certain areas that may require legal regulation may need preparatory work that the IISL might be able to carry out for the consideration of COPUOS. The IISL will be honored to continue to be of assistance. I thank you very much for your attention.
I thank the representative of the International Institute of Space Law. Is there any other delegation wishing to speak under this item at this meeting? I see none. We will therefore continue our consideration of Agenda Item 3, General Exchange of Views, this afternoon. Distinguished delegates, I would now like to begin our consideration of Agenda Item 5, Status and Application of the 5 United Nations Treaties on Outer Space. The first speaker on my list is the distinguished representative of Costa Rica, who will speak on behalf of a group of Latin American states.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. It is an honor to make the following statement on behalf of Latin America and Caribbean countries as follow: Argentina, Brazil, the plurinational state of Bolivia, Chile, Costa Rica, Cuba, Ecuador, El Salvador, Paraguay, the Dominican Republic, Uruguay, and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Mr. Chairperson, this year we are commemorating the 40th anniversary of the opening for signature of the agreement governing the activities of states on the Moon and other celestial bodies, also known as the Moon Treaty. This was the last binding instrument pertaining to international space law which was negotiated by this subcommittee. The current reality of space activities differs very much from what we had when we negotiated the 5 treaties emanating from this forum. So we need to address the need to assess the legal regime, considering that the subcommittee might make a contribution to generating updated legal instruments in line with and bearing in mind technological and scientific progress in this area. We appreciate headway achieved in the working group on the status and application of the 5 UN treaties on outer space, chaired by Bernhard Schmidt-Ted, and we agree that the committee and both subcommittees must coordinate their endeavors in such a way as to assure complementarity. This working group is entrusted with the preparation of a draft guidance document containing a summary on the legal regime of outer space and the interconnection of substantive areas in the application and implementation thereof. The purpose is to help states to implement activities in exploration and utilization of outer space for peaceful purposes, particular attention being paid to accession to treaties. The document should provide valuable guidance for states that should wish to or will wish to become parties to the 5 treaties of the United Nations that relate to outer space. Despite the fact that the 5 treaties are the cornerstone to international space law, this subcommittee is mandated to review its contents in the light of scientific and technological developments and the present challenges that arise from a diversification of space players and ever-greater privatization and commercial nature of space-related activities. As we have conveyed on other occasions, COPUOS and the bolstering of activities must go hand in hand with an ever greater number of states parties to the space treaties, because universality or universal application is of the essence to assure sustainability and security of space activities. This is why our endeavors over the next 2 weeks are so relevant. It is our opinion that transparency and confidence building must be stepped up to preserve safety of space activities and among them the registration of objects launched into space. That's why this subcommittee must redouble efforts to make sure that we have more states adhere and accede to the Convention on Registry of Objects Launched into Space, and for them to have complete and timely registry of objects launched and maintaining their national registries up to date. This is why it's so important for new space players. That's why we remain convinced of the fact that international space law must constantly be developed in keeping with its evolution, and this subcommittee must identify legal shortcomings in the present legal system, studying which could be dealt with in the form of guidelines and which need to be supplemented. Thank you, sir.
Costa Rica for her statement on behalf of a group of Latin American states. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United States.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to provide the views of the United States on this agenda item. The 4 core treaties governing the use of outer space have served the states' parties well over many decades. As I said in my opening remarks for this session, the United States believes that these treaties continue to serve the national interest of the United States, other space actors, and the international community as a whole. The United States is honored to serve as one of the depositaries for 3 of these treaties: the Outer Space Treaty, the Rescue and Return Agreement, and the Liability Convention. I've consulted with the U.S. State Department's Treaty Office regarding actions taken in Washington with respect to these treaties, and can report that in June 2018, United Arab Emirates acceded to the Rescue and Return Agreement. We would welcome any further information from other depositaries on any relevant treaty actions since this subcommittee's last meeting. We also would welcome further adherence to these treaties, and hope that those states and eligible international organizations, including some members of UN COPUOS and some organizations that participate as observers in this subcommittee, that have not yet joined these treaties will carefully consider the merits of becoming party to these important treaties in the coming year. In particular, we strongly urge countries that are active in the space sector in any way, including through their private sectors, to become party and fully implement these treaties. This year, we look forward to working with the rest of the working group to discuss the Unispace Plus 50 Thematic Priority 2 draft document that has been circulated regarding the legal regime of outer space and global governance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States for his statement. Are there any other delegations wishing to speak on this agenda item at this meeting? I see none. We will therefore continue our consideration of agenda item 5 this afternoon. Distinguished delegates, I would now like to begin our consideration of agenda item 12, general exchange of views on the legal aspects of space traffic management. I have only one country requesting the floor on this item, and it's Mexico. Por favor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. The Mexican delegation would bring to the attention of the Subcommittee on Legal Affairs its concern in respect of the management of space traffic in what we call outer space, though this issue should not neglect airspace. We cannot possess technology without prejudice to the fact that legal provisions contained in the space treaties need to be complied with, such as registry of so-called space objects, and the provisions established in the rules of the International Telecommunication Union. To continue with the topic of sustainability of space activities, it is of the essence to have operation and exploitation of space objects come about under the best possible conditions, preventing harmful interference because of the proliferation of satellites, especially in low orbit. This points to the need for experts to come forward with proposals. that bring together both issues of airspace and outer space. Although these are different legal areas, we're again referring to long-term sustainability of space activities. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico for his statement. Are there any other requests for the floor? I see Germany, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me the floor. Mr. Chairman, distinguished delegates, between 2007 and 2017, the number of objects launched into orbit has increased by a factor of 4. And this trend is expected to continue at an accelerated rate. In order to safeguard the unimpeded access to outer space, as well as the free use of outer space by everyone without discrimination, additional rules and regulations for the Space Traffic Management, short STM, are warranted. To Germany, it is very clear that only an international approach to STM will meet the needs of the growing global space economy in terms of safety and predictability. Therefore, we took carefully note of the different views expressed under this agenda item during the last 3 years. We are rather optimistic that slowly and steadily there will be a growing multilateral consensus on the best way forward on establishing an international regime for STM. To this end, it will be helpful to clarify the different dimensions of STM. Firstly, with regards to the technical and operational dimension of STM, Germany is cooperating closely with many partners on the sharing of space situational awareness, SSA, data, and space surveillance and tracking, SST, services. Secondly, with regards to the regulatory and policy dimensions of STM, we see a need for further global engagement. Existing international fora such as COPUOS will be well equipped to further develop STM standards, guidelines, and best practices. As far as legal aspects are concerned, this subcommittee is mandated to develop, for instance, a common understanding of the attribution of fault with regards to liability for in-orbit operations. Our discussions here are complemented by academic research, interactions between practitioners and decision-makers, as well as contributions by international institutions such as the International Academy of Astronautics. Taken all together, they should guide us in a reflection on the concept of an international STM regime and what it entails, as well as on the benefits it will have for the safe and sustainable conduct of outer space activities. Mr. Chairman, the 5 UN treaties on outer space already do form the constitutional basis with regards to the regulatory and policy dimension of international STM. Furthermore, substantial elements of the 21 guidelines of the long-term sustainability of outer space activities represent a sound first building block of STM. See, for example, the guideline on sharing of information on space objects and orbital events, or the guideline on improving accuracy of orbital data on space objects. As we continue our work on LTS, additional building blocks of a comprehensive international STM regime will certainly emerge. Also, in other areas of international concern, internationally agreed guidelines and technical standards have proven to be the most suitable tool for the purpose of managing international traffic matters efficiently and sustainably. Both ICAO's Air Navigation Commission and IMO's Maritime Safety Committee constitute institutionalized procedures to develop such regulations on a technical level while giving due consideration to the specific national interests of its member states. We believe it is time to consider how this can be achieved for outer space, because safe and sustainable conduct of outer space activities is in the interest of the international community as a whole. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of Germany. Are there any other requests for the floor? I see none. We will therefore continue our consideration of agenda item 12 this afternoon. On agenda item 3, maybe? No? 5? Okay. We'll proceed as decided before. Distinguished delegates, I will now adjourn this meeting of the subcommittee, but before doing so, I would like to inform you of our schedule of work for this afternoon. We will meet promptly at 3 p.m. At that time, we'll continue our consideration of Agenda Item 3, General Exchange of Views. Agenda Item 5, Status and Application of the 5 United Nations Treaties on Outer Space. And Agenda Item 12, General Exchange of Views on the Legal Aspects of Space Traffic Management. Following the adjournment of the plenary meeting this afternoon, the Working Group on the Status and Application of the 5 United Nations Treaties on Outer Space will hold its first meeting. Are there any questions or comments on this proposed schedule? I see none. This meeting is adjourned until 3 o'clock p.m.